Welcome to episode 2 of Real Health Radio.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
So on today's podcast, I have an interview with Scott Abel. Scott Abel is a former bodybuilder and author and first and foremost a fitness coach. He's coached hundreds of people from everyday men and women looking to lose weight to over 400 fitness and bodybuilding champions. And you can find his books on nutrition and eating issues and mindset, physique enhancement, and much more, all on Amazon or at his website, which is www.scottabelfitness.com, where he posts free articles and chapters from his book and videos. And I've been following Scott for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, and I really just love his approach. He's just such a great insight when it comes to sort of physique and body image issues and issues around food and just so many areas. And what I really like about today's interview is we discuss sort of metabolic damage, and he was actually the person who coined that phrase and what it really means. Why women are disproportionately more likely to have body image issues and issues around food and much more than men. He talks about this idea of being sort of a weight loss tourist versus being sort of a weight loss person who moves there permanently. And I think it's a really good way to think about the concept. And we also then look at sort of parents and how they can influence their children, both in a positive or a negative way, in terms of their relationship with food, their relationship with their body. And this is much more than just what they say to their kids, but much more about their behaviors. So I hope you really enjoy today's interview. I just love chatting with Scott. He's just such a great guy. So without further ado, let's get started. So good to have you on the show today, Scott. Really happy to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
So to start off with, for people who don't know who you are, why don't you just begin with sort of who you are, how you got into the sort of health and fitness industry? I know you've been doing this now for sort of 4 decades, but how did it all begin for you?
Yeah, that's a polite way of saying I'm an old man now. It began, typical thing, growing up in sports and athletics and having that sort of get inside me. And then at the same time, I was pretty academically gifted. So I started pursuing bodybuilding. I got into the hardcore end of that, and I was into that for a while and made a name for myself in that genre for a long time. I was a writer for various magazines and a ghostwriter for various magazines. At the same time, I was earning my degree and my graduate education as well in social work. So I was involved in some pretty intense social work as a career choice at first, which really kind of later on I realized really separated me in terms of coaching know-how and coaching prowess. I'm quite adept at coaching because of my involvement in social work. Working with really specific, hard-to-reach populations made me a master communicator, and being able to get inside people's heads from where they come from and how they think, not necessarily how I think, which I think is missing in the fitness and diet industry. So it's something I came to, over the course of practice. Of course, in 4 decades, when you start and you're already at the highest end of something, over 4 decades, you just sort of hone your craft and get better and better at it. So that's led to me writing over a dozen books now and still working with clients one-to-one basis. And a lot of the books I wrote were born out of just paying attention and observing very common issues and very common problems that were coming up as individual problems on a psychological level, but were actually underlined by gender issues, age issues, fitness industry issues, OCD issues, things like that. So that led to me writing specific books like Metabolic Damage and the Dangers of Dieting, The Anti-Diet Approach to Weight Loss and Weight Control, Beyond Metabolism, The Other Side of the Mirror, which is a book about body image disorder in the fitness industry, things like that. So a lot of it was born out of just paying attention and having a passion for for being able to look at all sides of things and not just glamorize what is, but look, peek beneath the surface and peek behind the mirror to sometimes fitness isn't the answer to someone's issues. Sometimes fitness is the problem, and a lot of people need to start facing those things. So there's also mental fitness and emotional fitness to consider as well. So you put your body ahead of those two things, and it's never going to work out well.
Right. And so in terms of you kind of transitioning from being someone who's just participating in sports and physique to actually sort of coaching people, was that something that sort of happened pretty early on and pretty naturally for you?
Yeah, very naturally. I mean, even as a kid, I was once I'm Canadian, so grew up playing hockey, and I was the MVP of my hockey team. I was the captain of this team. I was just one of those things where I was always sort of the go-to person. Never really thought anything of it. I was too young, to know that was anything, special kind of thing. And then I just, people started to gravitate to me. I was having success on a pretty wide level early on in my career. Before I even knew what success was, I just became this go-to guy from miles around, because my competitors and my clients just looked so much different than everyone else and was so far ahead of everyone else. So that's something that the magazine publishers kind of took and ran with, and other people who wanted to compete wanted to be part of. So it created this big wave for me, and from there I just sort of achieved a lot of notoriety and reputation in a very, like I said, a very specific milieu at the time. But I've been able to expand and grow that from those days. I left that world a long time ago, but I left it in order to serve more people, so it's actually worked out for the better. But yeah, it's kind of always been there. I guess just the nature of my personality or whatever.
And how long did it take before you kind of went from being sort of just a normal trainer to then doing more of the kind of looking at the sort of body image work and that side of things? And was there something that sort of, was there a particular client, or was there something that happened that kind of made that shift? Because it's not the normal stuff that a lot of people talk about. And as you say, you kind of very much kind of glamorizing the exercise and the physique, but you obviously, you kind of pull back a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I was the one who initially coined the term metabolic damage. That term started with me. I'm the one who started that term. And what precipitated that was actually, like, again, I mentioned my age, halfway joking, but I mean, this is what happened. It's true. What had happened was I was in the hardcore end of the bodybuilding community and competition, but I'm older, so at the time there was only bodybuilding. There wasn't figure, there wasn't women's bikini, women's fitness model, all this stuff. As that started, the first thing that started was the women's fitness, and of course, women without a cheerleading or gymnastic background were at a disadvantage. So they tried to figure out a way. They realized that having more women competing meant more dollars in promoters' pockets and more people growing the sport at a grassroots level. So they came up with figure. When they came up with figure, that lessened the demand for athletic prowess. You don't really need to be athletically talented to do figure, but you need to have what we call the classic triangle shape. Well, a lot of girls don't have the classic triangle shape either, but the industry was noticing that this was a financial cash cow for them. So they started expanding the different varieties, and they turned figure into bikini, and that attracted more women. But for me, who was around before any of that existed, once it started to exist and get popular, what came along with that was what I called metabolic damage that I wrote a book about, and then eating disorders, depression, and psychological issues. All of a sudden, this stuff was exploding right in front of me, and people were coming to me for help with those things. Like, hey, Scott, like, why am I following my diet? And I'm following my diet. I'm not lying. Why have I gained 25 pounds? Like, I don't cheat. Like, what's going on here, kind of thing. So with the explosion in the popularity of figure and bikini came an explosion of other things that weren't around in the fitness community before. Like I said, metabolic damage, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, depression, things like that as well. So it just became a natural offshoot for me. The more I researched this stuff and found answers to it, the more it led me in other directions. So I even wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Empowered Woman Experience, and that's all about why this is so much more a female issue than it is a male issue. And then when you start exploring that, it becomes quite eye-opening in a shocking kind of way. So I'm going on too far about that, but there was that trigger that in the fitness industry, once figure and female competing became popularized, along with that came a lot of negatives that no one was talking about or dealing with in a real way.
And so just going back to what you were saying in terms of affecting women sort of disproportionately and sort of reasons for that, like give a bit of an explanation about why that happens.
Well, it's in my book, The Empowered Woman Experience, to talk about what I call the internalized notion of the modern beauty debt, that from a very young age, females in particular are led to internalize a notion of a beauty debt, meaning that no matter how they are, they're led to internalize it's never good enough. The accentuation there is on appearance. And so there's all kinds of books and stuff that talk about that the ideal female physique went from being something that was very average. For instance, I think it was the 1940 Miss America was 5'4" and 140 pounds, which was very average. And now in our day and age, she's 5'8" and 110 pounds. So you have a narrower and narrower what we call female ideal that fewer and fewer people can realistically fit into because of biology and other things, but will hurt themselves trying to fit into it. And that leads to all kinds of other issues. For instance, over 90% of people with eating disorders are female. Over 80% of people who take mind-altering medications like antidepressants and things like that are female. So there's a lot of these things that aren't just coincidences. They come from the stresses on the modern-day female to not just be superwoman, but to make sure you fit into the superwoman suit as well. And that's just too much pressure for a lot of people who have normal lives. Like, it's one thing when you're 20 and maybe you're not working or you're working at a gym, so you can, everyone around you is fit and buff and competing. So that's one thing. But you get to your 30s and you have a real life and you have kids, and you're still expected to be a size 4 or a size 6 or whatever it is. And you put pressure on yourself to be so. All of a sudden that affects your mental health, your emotional well-being, things like that. So as I said before, fitness is a lot more than just appearance. So I try to look at people's psychological health as well, because without that, the rest doesn't really mean a whole lot.
Yeah. And I think for me, when I read your books and see you're great on Facebook, so many kind of updates all the time, like there is a real appreciation of there's so many other things going on in your life, and you need to be appreciating those things, and you can't be sort of letting them sort of drop by the wayside for this goal of I want to be a certain weight or look a certain way. And it's that kind of like, at what expense?
Yeah, I think it's an absolute travesty for me to have very intelligent clients who don't have better things to think about than food and meals. I think that's a waste of mental energy. Food was never meant to be something that we obsess about. And, ironically enough, the the people, again, in that demographic who take the most antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds aren't just women. They're educated women in their mid-30s to early 40s. So these aren't stupid people. These are very, very smart people, but they take on idealistic images and expectations that just don't fit into reality. So a lot of times it's about managing expectations and fitting them into, what's real and what's achievable versus, what's fantasy. So, just marking all the tragedies I've seen in the industry, from suicide to, broken marriages and people no longer seeing their kids, but, they're on Facebook bragging about how they placed in some show, in some fitness contest. I mean, priorities tend to get pretty skewed, and with everyone running to glorify them. Oh, you look wonderful, you're so great, and they don't know the background there that I would know as a coach, as someone who's trained these people before and whatnot. So, I mean, just maybe a month ago, someone brought to my attention, a sort of a former client who, quote unquote, was taking her competition to the next level, quote unquote. And the next level, all that really meant was going to a new coach who was notorious for drugs. And, her physique reflected that. You could see in her early pictures a natural physique of a woman who really didn't have the genetics to compete, but whatever, if you're going to have fun, go ahead. And then 2 or 3 years later, my new coach, and I took it to the next level. And for anyone with realistic eyes, you can tell she's under the influence of pharmaceuticals. And that's not even the point if that's your choice. The point is, in the process, she lost her husband. She no longer has any contact with her kids. Seeing a psychiatrist, none of that's ever talked about on Facebook, of course, only her placing in a contest. So, a lot of times people are seeing a tip of an iceberg and glorifying it and, not seeing all the ramifications and consequences and collateral damage that go along with that. So we keep glorifying the appearance without dealing with the reality of the essence of and the substance of what's going on underneath. And we got to start talking, reality. We got to start talking, getting real. And again, like I said, mental and emotional fitness should come first. And if you have those priorities right side up, then, your physical body will take care of itself.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the big things I notice with clients who have issues is sort of expectations is something you've talked about, but that real sort of perfectionist and perfection in sort of all areas of life. And there's a great sort of Brene Brown quote where she sort of talks about that women should be able to do it all, do it effortlessly, and never let them see you sweat. And I think that's sort of the mentality that so many people take on in so many aspects of their life. And it's just unfortunately not realistic.
Yeah, it's not only be able to do it all and be able to do it well, but be able to do it all, do it well in stilettos.
Yeah.
Which just gets more and more of a caricature of real life than actual real life. And that's the kind of thing you can point out to people and they nod their heads in agreement, but when you look at, they still, self-torture themselves by, trying to fit into that mold, whereas instead of questioning the mold to begin with. So, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with fitness. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a healthy level of vanity. But when those things cross a line, and perfectionism, as you mentioned, I mean, that's one of the markers of, the common denominators of people with eating disorders is that they are perfectionists. So perfectionists tend to be people who, are insecure and emotionally judgmental. So, those aren't things that bode well for a long-term approach to anything because they create pressure and anxiety.
And so, like, one of the big things for you that you said sort of you kind of talked about was sort of metabolism. And I think this is kind of how I first kind of came across your work. And it wasn't just metabolism, but basically the stuff you were writing about was what I was seeing in practice. So people who were kind of messing up their metabolism, sort of real issues around food and sort of eating disorders, and just this whole kind of fear around sort of food and this kind of backwards approach with health. I mean, how does sort of this focus on sort of metabolism, how does sort of dieting and this kind of focus on sort of eating and being very strict with your eating, how does that impact on metabolism?
Well, it can impact in a lot of ways. I mean, it can be done in a way where you optimize metabolism, or it can be done in a way where you create a dysfunctional, distorted metabolism. So it depends on how it's done. But, a lot of the times people are yo-yo dieters. They just don't identify themselves in that term because maybe they're doing it for a photo shoot, or they're doing it for their wedding, or they're doing it for, a contest or whatever. But in essence, they're really yo-yo dieting, and that really wreaks havoc on the not just metabolic systems of the body, but the hormonal systems. Creates a lot of hormonal obstruction and things like that. So people start becoming strangers to their own bodies, and that's a real scary proposition, because they don't know how to get it back, and what used to work before won't work now. So they're trying to repeat something that worked in the past, but it didn't really work because it caused, metabolic dysfunction, disruption, and hormonal obstruction. So what used to be fine for them won't work anymore. And so they find themselves in this maze of trying to figure it all out. And unfortunately, often that leads to obsessing about food and diet, and that creates even more issues in itself. What I was referring to earlier about modern issues of depression and anxiety that are so affiliated with weight and appearance and body weight and things like that. And it's ironic that the smartest mammalian species on the planet is the only species that's afraid of their own food supply. It's completely unnatural the way our brains evolved to be afraid of food. Our brains evolved to associate emotional comfort with the eating experience, not with food itself, not with specific foods, but with the experience of eating. If you ever, I jokingly say in my workshops about this, no mother ever fed her child with a slingshot. The idea there is that emotional nurturing comes from our very base experiences as babies and infants, whether we're fed from the bottle or the breast. We're usually fed as babies by being nurtured and held by someone else, usually cooing at a baby or an infant in very soothing, calm voice. All you have to do is walk through a food court in a mall and watch a mother feeding her child, and it's done with care and emotional investment, emotional attachment. Those things get what we call imprinted on us for a young age. So we are meant to associate emotional comfort with the dining experience. That's why restaurants exist to begin with. So to replace that with what I call the North American diet mentality in a way that you now become fearful and afraid of food and eating is completely unnatural for your brain, and that produces a lot of emotional torment inside of people, and then the roller coaster's on. It's like riding a constant roller coaster.
And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the yardstick that people use to assess, is their diet working, is their diet not working, is basically weight. And it's like, it's working because I'm losing weight, or it's not working because I'm putting on weight. And the whole kind of biofeedback of, am I hungry? Do I need to sleep? All of those things just kind of get forgotten about or tried to be ignored or fought against, instead of like really sort of listened to and worked with.
Exactly. I just scheduled a Facebook post my Facebook posts are months in advance, but I have a term for this called vanity blindness. People, they'll write me and they have a list of all the ways that their body isn't cooperating with them. But that list is usually a reflection of all the ways they aren't cooperating with their bodies. Your body is in constant communication with you if you just pay attention to it. But unfortunately, if you put appearance before health and you start ignoring these signs, that the body's trying to tell you, eventually the body can't keep up anymore and try to work in its own defense kind of thing. So I call that vanity blindness, when people don't even know what their own biofeedback is, how to read it, what it's telling them, just like every other mammal. And, other mammals are quite naturally able to read their biofeedback. and we start distorting that because we want to fit into, narrower and narrower ideal images that just aren't realistic. So, it should be about feeling better, doing better, getting better. And the process should feed and nurture all three of those things. So whatever you're involved in should have you feeling better, being better, and getting better. No one's going to stay at something that feels bad and end up, at a long-term accomplished goal. It's just not how our brains work. So, if something's causing us torment or anxiety or angst, we're going to look for ways to, calm that down or to relieve it or find relief from it, those kinds of things. So ironically enough, when fear of food and food becomes the issue that they're stressing about, they end up, because of what I talked about earlier, the food being an emotional comfort thing, they end up reaching for indulgent food, hyper-palatable food, to actually relieve themselves of the stress that they're obsessing about food is causing to begin with. So food actually relieves the problem that food and the accentuation of food is actually causing to begin with. So it becomes this vicious circle for people. They get involved with binge eating and things like that, and it's because they never give their mind a break from food and eating, meals and food, body weight and food, all that kind of stuff. And it's really, there should be better things to think about in your day. These things should be part of your day. They should not be your day.
Yeah. And look, I think that kind of brings up something I wanted to kind of talk about, which is, from my perspective, food issues are sort of rarely about food. Like, food is often someone's tool for dealing with whatever their problems are, and often those problems then link into sort of self-belief about sort of who they are, or that they feel unlovable or unworthy. And really, and I know you've talked about this before, that people's sort of dieting strategies are sort of their external way of sort of trying to deal with a sort of internal problem of that sort of not feeling enough. And sort of, how do you get people to start to kind of change that sort of inner story or the sort of inner belief about sort of who they are?
Yeah, well, you just opened there's whole levels to that, right? I mean, it goes from A to Z in terms of what level of dysfunction they might be and how they're using food or how food is using them. That kind of thing. It exists on very, very many levels. For some people, it's an emotional avoidance thing. Food becomes the thing to avoid stronger emotions like anger, frustration, anxiety. So food becomes a form of substance use. Oftentimes it can become a distraction. People, go on diets and compete because it's a nice distraction from real life for 12 or 14 weeks or whatever. So there's many, elements of how that can play out. There's really no one common denominator about how it happens, but it is probably the number one issue out there, especially among females, is a healthy relationship to themselves is reflected in a healthy relationship with food. Because, I've always said you don't have relationships with food, you have relationships with people. So if you're talking about a relationship with food, you're really talking about a reflection of the relationship you do or do not have with yourself. And that's what food sort of represents. So if it's skewed, it's unbalanced, then that's what it's telling you about yourself. That food is just the representative thing, but not the thing. So as I said in my Empowered Woman book, I said, chances are you don't have a food and eating issue. You have a thinking and feeling issue about food and eating. And that's what most people don't get. I mean, they still will try to hire me, to write them a diet, but they don't have a diet issue. They have a thinking and feeling issue about food that a diet isn't going to correct. So they keep going in circles thinking it's nutritional or metabolic when it's neither one of those things. So, that's the first thing you got to get them to understand. And then the other thing about food is that it's unlike other drugs, even though it is drug-like because it lights up the reward centers of the brain. But it's unlike other drugs in that we can't live without it. So we have to have food. But when you start using food to relieve emotions or to calm emotions, or to transition emotions, all those experiences, then the old saying is true that the chains of habit are too light to be felt till they're too heavy to be broken. So you start using food in a way that doesn't seem like it's hurting you at all, and before you know it, it's so constant it becomes habitual. Then it's a habit that is really, really hard to break, as hard as smoking or anything else. Once these things become habitual, people need to know that a habit is a neural event in the mind. What that means is it's an automatic process of the mind, and it once those things become habitual, like I said, those chains are too heavy to be broken, and it takes a habit to break a habit. And if you've had a bad habit for 30 years, you're not going to break it in 30 days. That's just not reality. So it takes a lot of things outside of a diet focus. It takes what we call cognitive restructuring and things like that in order to find other and better things to think about, so that the volume button in your head to do with food and eating gets turned down lower and lower till it's no longer something that you can choose to not pay attention to it because the volume's lower. You turn down your threshold of volume in your brain of needing to pay attention to these cues and urges like hunger and appetite and impulses to eat when you don't really want to, and eat foods that you don't really want to or that don't serve you well, that kind of thing. So it gets back to treating yourself in a self-nurturing way, and that can be a long road back for some people. So a lot of people start something for one reason, they continue it for a different reason. It's easy to get off track in terms of health when you start equating leanness with health and leanness with wellness and happiness. That's a slippery slope.
Yeah. In your book, you had a 3-book series called Food Issues and You, which I really love. And you talk a lot about it in it, about the triangle of awareness. And this is something I use a lot with clients, but I want you to just kind of talk a little bit about it and how people can use it and what sort of the concept is.
Yeah, it's a very Zen concept. I try to get people to picture an isosceles triangle, which is a triangle that has, equal sides. A triangle, first of all, what is a triangle? A triangle is something where all three sides, touch each other. And if an isosceles triangle, all three sides are balanced. So what I talk about there is, the balance exists in mental, emotional, and behavioral elements. If any of these things are skewed in one particular way, then there's an imbalance, and that imbalance will be reflected in someone's life somehow, whether it's weight, whether it's relationship issues, whether it's drug or alcohol dependency issues, all kinds of things. So what you're after there in the triangle of awareness is, where is my emotional fitness and health? Where is my mental emotional fitness and health? A lot of times with these particular issues we have in this industry, ironically we call it fitness, but people with these weight issues and these other issues, actually they have a problem with what I call stinking thinking. They're using their emotions to think, and they don't realize it. They're thinking with emotions. Well, emotions are more powerful than rational thought. So if you're led by your emotions, then chances are you're going to not make rational decisions. So people need to turn that right side up. There's a difference between thinking with your emotions versus employing your emotions to think. The latter indicates, strong mental and emotional fitness. The former is someone more prone to impulse control issues and things like that. So a lot of times people don't even know the difference. So if you don't know the difference, then how can you be in balance? So these are, really, really important things. And emotions will always trump rational thought. I mean, that's just all across psychology, that's a well-known, accepted thing. So the problem there, if you've got food or eating issues, is every time someone acts on those, they judge themselves. When that brings in the emotions, the typical emotions of guilt, shame, frustration, self-anger. All these things tend to perpetuate more maladaptive behaviors. In other words, guilt and shame tend to produce more self-punishing behaviors. They don't relieve that. Whereas if you can get outside of that and start thinking about what you can learn every time you slip up, that's the way out. And for that, I really recommend people start journaling. I call journaling strength and conditioning for emotional fitness. Once people start journaling, that's a form of communicating with their inner self, or communicating with their basic self, their authentic self, and that's a way out, because they start talking to themselves in a more rational way, rather than just judging their behaviors as good or bad, right or wrong, good me, bad me, those kind of things that tend to keep people locked into, self-abusing, self-hating, forms of impulse control issues, or drug dependency and things like that.
And what you said about journaling there, like, I totally agree. I often, when working with clients, I'll get them to do different written exercises. And the people who get into those, like really get into those exercises and really start to kind of do a lot of that sort of writing and opening up, like, it's such a transformative process. And they just get so much out of it. And stuff comes up that is a kind of a couple of layers down that they hadn't really been thinking about for a long time. And yeah, it's really quite an amazing process for them to go through.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to take a while. It's like anything else. I mean, it takes regular practice. A lot of people will, I did it once and, I didn't really get anything out of it. Well, that's like saying I did one aerobics class this year and I didn't get anything out of it. You've got to sit down and do it earnestly, and you've got to, you get good at something that you practice. And it's amazing to me how just out of touch with themselves people can be. I mean, it's just something that just comes very natural to me, and probably why I've been able to, excel at things is, it's just very natural for me to be my own best friend. But, people with eating disorders and things like that, they fear solitude, they fear being alone, they fear things like that. And they equate, negative emotions with those things. But really, those are the things that will help them out of the issues they're in. And journaling is a really, really powerful self-connecting process. And anyone who's struggling with any kind of issue, if they journal earnestly and regularly, in a disciplined way, like they would with working out, and over time, like I said, that's strength and conditioning for the emotional fitness realm. It really works.
And in terms of people, and in what you say about people kind of fearing being on their own, like I totally agree with that. And that's often the time in which people can play out their eating issues, whether that be restricting, whether that being sort of ritualistic behavior or binge eating. What is the solution in terms of the very beginning? Is it that person should be spending more time with other people, sort of in your kind of opinion, or should they be kind of making them spend more time on their own and trying to be kind of really taking that stuff head on?
Well, they have to, this is what coaching is for, because you can't paint everyone with the same brush.
Yeah.
Working with personalities is that's where the fascinating component comes in, because there's people that can do the cold turkey, and there's people that need to desensitize themselves to different environments slowly. But, the problem is people tend to be really, really counterintuitive when it comes to solutions. One of the things that frustrates me, for example, is when I bring things up on Facebook and stuff constantly. And I consider Facebook for me like mini blogs. It's not for me personal. I use it as a coaching platform. But it's amazing to me how many people will write comments when I point out issues and problems. Their comments will be reflective of, so what's the answer? Like the answer is something I can write down in a few sentences on Facebook, and okay, I'm all done with that problem. That just boggles my mind that people think in this world that we live in that because they want a solution to something, then it should be forthcoming because they want it, not because they're going to earn it. It's amazing to me how many people want something different in their life, something to change in their life. But when you get down to brass tacks, they aren't willing to lift a finger to really do anything to facilitate that change. Journaling's a hassle. I don't really have time. It's like, well, okay, but you have time to, go out in your car, drive to the store, buy a bunch of stuff to binge on it. You got time for that. So a lot of times you have to put the responsibility on people itself. You, me, no one else can do something for anyone that they're not ready to do. We can facilitate, we can help be a catalyst in that process, but that's the most we can manage. In terms of solutions, people need to be realistic and stop with the solution lies in body weight change. Stop with the solution is on the scale. Everyone says they get that, but the first thing they talk about is some diet they're on or how much weight they've lost. Well, if you're just going to 6 months later be back where you started, that was a pretend solution all along, and I can usually see through that kind of pretentiousness. But what usually is necessary and absolute must is something that most people don't get, then that it all starts with patience. And most people just won't be patient enough. They want the answer yesterday, and then when they do slip up, they don't realize that progress is a 1 step forward, 2 steps back process. That's what progress really is. There's no such thing as linear progress. A solution like this that every day from here on in is just going to be perfect and I'm never going to slip. The difference is learning how to look at your slip-ups rationally so you can learn from them rather than emotionally so you just self-judge and then you never get anywhere. And that's why you keep repeating the same behavior, because the old saying is people who don't learn from history are destined to keep repeating it. And that's true of countries and it's true of individual psychology. So the reason they keep repeating behavior is because they keep responding to it in an emotionally disruptive way. That's not self-nurturing, it's self-rejecting and self-hating. As I've always said, no one self-hates their way to a productive result. No one self-hates their way to, a worthy accomplishment. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. But it starts with patience, and most people don't realize what patience really means. And that means calm energy applied. When it's demanded. Instead of losing your shit. The minute things start to get messy.
And I think for me, a big focus is on getting people to enjoy the process as opposed to just look at the end goal. Because if you can then be enjoying that, and enjoying it might be a strange word to use when someone's kind of trying to overcome something like an eating issue, but it become curious about it. Like, as you keep saying, kind of learn from it. Because if all you kind of focus on and care about is sort of the end goal and kind of wanting to be at that sort of place where it's sort of amazing and there's no issues, and that just takes so much work. That people will throw in the towel well before they ever get to anywhere near that destination.
Yeah, it's funny you just mentioned something. I have a chapter, but I just completed this morning, actually, a new book called The Psychology of Achievement. And in that, I talk about the difference between process goals and end goals. And it's the process goals that take you to the end goal. People that tend to be focused on the end goal are the people less likely to get there, or they get there with a lot of anxiety all along the way. And it's I deal with so many people as a coach over the last 4 decades. I have clients all over the world, so I even deal with cultural differences in terms of the way people think. But I can't get people to understand that I couldn't imagine working out every day if I hated the process, or it made me anxious, or it made me fearful, or it made me any of those negative things. It's that old saying, fear is like having an ugly mistress. It's that kind of, counterintuitive emotional approach to trying to get something done. I love working out. I mean, for a lot of people, when the summer comes here, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's too bad you don't golf, or it's too bad, you don't scuba dive, you don't golf, you don't do. Well, I get from working out what other people get from all those activities. So, it's something other people think, oh, you work out to stay in shape, or you work out to get in shape. No, I work out because it does something for me. I stopped working out years and years ago. I stopped working out for how it makes me look. I always work out for how it makes me feel. So, that's something that makes it sustainable. And in terms of process goals, people have to find the challenge in that, but the challenge has to be invigorating. If it's full of anxiety and worry about, the best way to sabotage something like that is to start making it measurable. We live in a North American mindset where we should measure everything. All of a sudden you can't go for a walk on a nice day without putting on your little, fit watch and telling you how many steps you took and how many calories you burned. And why not just go out and go for a walk in the day and leave all that shit? It's like I keep coming back to a quote Einstein said, which was like, he said, not everything that counts that can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So a lot of times, people destroy the process, the invigorating element of a process, by getting into measuring everything. They keep a training journal, but instead of talking about how the workout felt and how it made them, they start recording how much weight they lifted so they can, try to, better that next time, or how many miles they ran in how much time. A lot of the times these things can become counterproductive. So at the end of the day, they get on a weight scale, and is my weight different? Well, and if it's not, then, then all of a sudden that mentally sabotages. We're back to that triangle of awareness again. Mentally sabotages the work they put in that day, whereas the scale might not have meant anything at all. So yeah, there's that, people need to be process oriented. And, one of my Zen expressions is, if you really get it, then the process is the goal and the goal is the process. And that's, if you stay focused on that, then you're likely to get where you want to go. But if you keep thinking about the final outcome, then chances are, you'll slip up more and more till it's just too much pressure.
Yeah. And what I find is there are certain people who have got to their desired weight or whatever it may be through that process. And it's not this kind of like hallowed place or promised land that they thought it'd be. It's this realization of, if I've now got to keep up doing what I've been doing to keep this up and maintain it, then this is going to be a pretty horrible life.
Yeah, in my book, The Anti-Diet Approach, I talk about the difference between the journey to the land of weight loss, or I talk about being a weight loss tourist. And what I mean by that is, the people that take vacations, when you plan a vacation to go somewhere as a tourist, you pack to go there for a week or two, to be there. You pack, the right clothing and for that climate and stuff. It's the same with weight loss. People go through the process to get there, but they don't think of the process in terms of how to stay there. It's a different thing if I'm going to Aruba every year as a tourist, or I plan on moving there. If I'm going to move there, then I'm packing a whole different set of things. And it's the same with mindset. Mindset works the same way in terms of weight loss. So if you want to move to weight loss city, then you can't think like a weight loss tourist. But that's, we live in this short-term thinking world of, got to get there, got to get there, got to get there, got to get there. Oh, now I'm there. How do I stay here? They have no concept, and then there's all the, like you said, the psychological ramifications that go with that. If you did something unsustainable to get there, then why are you shocked that it's not sustainable? There's also reminds me of an old T-shirt. On the front it said, "I lost 50 pounds with Weight Watchers," and on the back the T-shirt says, "And I still feel like shit." So, it's about having the right priorities. If your engagement in the process isn't invigorating and it isn't positive in terms of the challenge that it presents to you, then not only is it not sustainable, but you're tarnishing it all along the way. Again, like I said, I can't imagine how much I enjoy working out. I can't imagine going into work out every day with that kind of emotional burden on me that it's got to be leading me to some promised land down the road, and that's all I'm thinking about. Now, I think about being present in there, and that's what sort of invigorates me for the rest of my day. And I think a lot of that is missing these days, where we want to measure and count everything.
Yeah. I remember one of the first articles that I read of yours was looking at sort of different statistics from some different studies about sort of young girls and their beliefs about sort of being fat and disliking their body, and looking at sort of parents' roles in that, and sort of environmental factors, and sort of how much do you think that sort of then plays a role in terms of sort of the psychology of thoughts around food and body image?
Well, yeah, I mean, the research is there. It plays a huge role. You know, a lot of parents think they're doing their children a service by, starting them, making them food aware at a young age, but they're not making them food aware. They're making them food averse. And there's a difference between being food aware versus being food averse. And if a young child's told, don't eat that, it'll make you fat, or, mommy doesn't eat that, then look how, that kind of thing, that imprints in people's minds, and they start seeing, in young kids' minds, and lo and behold, that, food ends up being a problem with them, weight ends up being a problem with them, because it's over accentuated in the household. Maybe the mother is, been a long time dieter herself, and they're just passing it down to the next generation, kind of thing. So yeah, the best way about it is to be like we were in my generation when we grew up, that food was something that was enjoyed, and you sat around the family, dinner table and talked about your day. And like I said, that goes back to that sort of emotional connection to the dining experience that was very natural for our species. That kind of thing, rather than implanting this notion that food can hurt you, and food is something to be very wary of, and all those kinds of things. It doesn't create a healthy connection with a very natural positive association that our brains are meant to have. So there's tons of research on that, on how a child's mindset can be affected that way. So yeah, there's tons of stuff on that. So the best example, children emulate what they experience, not what they're told. So again, in my Empowered Woman book, talk a lot about that it's a mother can tell a daughter all day long that you got to love yourself and you got to appreciate yourself. But if all the daughter sees is the mother weighing herself constantly and denying herself food and talking about it, like, oh, I'm so hungry, I'm so starved, and then going and weighing herself and then bitching and complaining if she gained 2 pounds, that's what the daughter is going to internalize. Not what the mother says, you should love yourself and all those things, if the mother's not doing it herself in a way that's exemplified in her behavior. So that's what I'm surprised that people don't know that. But, children emulate more what they experience than what they're told. Another parallel example there is children who grow up in a family of smokers. The parents can tell them all day long, you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't smoke. But the fact that the parents smoke makes like an 60 to 80% chance that the child's going to smoke too, regardless of what is said to them. So, it's that kind of children model what they experience more than what they're told.
Yeah. And look, if I reflect upon my own experience, like my mum, I can never remember her ever going on a diet, weighing herself, ever kind of even having those kind of discussions. And I've sort of got a sister. I can't ever remember her going on any diets or kind of food ever being anything like that. So I from my very narrow sort of experience, I can see how that sort of plays out.
Yeah, and I've got a ton of experience with it. So it's amazing when you see the emphasis put on someone's background growing up on body image and or food and weight. These are the people that tend to be attracted to competing in the fitness industry and whatnot, and it becomes a distortion of who they are. So, when body image becomes self-image rather than a reflection of self-image, then, that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah. one of the things I kind of notice a lot when I read people's books or people's blogs is I can pick up pretty quickly whether they work with clients or not. And it becomes obvious whether they just kind of read a lot of research and studies. But I think something totally different happens when you try and then apply that stuff and work with sort of real live human beings. And I know you talked sort of earlier on about sort of being a coach and sort of doing sort of work with sort of your original background. Sort of what does sort of being a coach to you sort of really mean, and what can people sort of, should they be sort of focusing on and sort of learning from that?
I'm going to be actually writing a book about that. I'm going to start in the fall, but yeah, there's this distortion in this industry that coaches are in the fitness business. If you're a coach, you're not in the fitness business. That's the vehicle that you use to operate. You're in the people business. And the people business requires communication skills. It requires skills of empathy. In other words, like I said at the beginning, you have to be able to think and comment and advise and assess based upon where the client is coming from, not based upon where your expertise lies. Too many coaches in this industry are in love with themselves, and they're in love with their own methods. They have no real connection to their clients beyond how their clients make them look. That really pisses me off. It should be about the client, whatever that client is. I have clients, female clients, who are 300 pounds. They're just as important to me as my client who's maybe going to be on a magazine cover. I don't seldom even deal with those kind of people anymore. But it's all about, communication skills. You can have all the fitness knowledge in the world, or even more meaningless is how many fitness titles you've won. It's amazing to me that people gravitate to someone because they won a trophy in a fitness contest. That has nothing to do with whether they can impart realistic, real-world application of change, transformative experience to a client. That's a special skill, and it's required by doing it. Book smart is the new pretension in our industry because it's easy to go on a Facebook page and, Facebook, I call it fake book because it's all about appearances. It's all about managing your digital avatar of how you want people to see you. It's not about who you really are. And people who believe in that, like someone who's only posting about themselves constantly and those kinds of things, the people that buy into that are really easy to manipulate. But because someone's won a trophy in a physique contest, that doesn't make them a knowledgeable coach. And you can be a knowledgeable coach and still not be a very good coach. You got to have the people skills for that, and you got to have the background for that. And you have to be able to touch people where they come from, touch them where they live, in a way where they want to change. Like I said, a coach doesn't change anybody. A coach can only be a catalyst to that change. Now, yes, you have to have, I'm an expert in nutrition, diet, metabolism, and fitness because it's necessary that I become so. But I'm even more, I have even more acumen in terms of dealing with people because of my interest and background in social work and social dynamics. And, no one book smart can do that. It might look good on Facebook posts to quote a bunch of research and all this and that, but, the books are emotionally cold. They're emotionally stagnant. They have no emotional involvement. People aren't any of those things. So you have to be able to move people and have people want to move themselves based upon their interactions with you. And you have to, coaching is all about supporting someone. You can't just chastise people and treat them like an undeserving child if things aren't going that way. People have real lives as well. And, a lot of the times it's about understanding and support at the right time. So, it's about knowing when it's time to talk hard and knowing when it's time to offer support. And, those things are what we call nuances to the coaching experiences. And there's a lot of nuances when you're dealing with individual personalities, no one can book smart their way to being a good coach in anything. Like you'll never find it's like I always say, you'll never find an NHL, a professional hockey player or a professional hockey coach from Saudi Arabia, because you can't study your way to that. That's something that's earned only in experience, and coaching prowess is the same thing. I'm 4+ decades into this, so that's a lot of experience you get with a lot of different mindsets, different clients, different problems, different issues. You don't last this long if you don't have the special kind of acumen to deal with that. So I think a lot of times coaches are more concerned with their way and their methods rather than understanding that it's really not about that. It's about the client.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree, and yeah, very well said. And look, it's been great chatting with you, Scott. I'm a big fan of your work and just sort of love reading all your blogs and Facebook updates and your books. If someone's wanting to find out more about you, where should they go?
They can opt in at scottabelfitness.com. That's my newer of the two websites. If they opt in there, they'll get a couple free chapters of my books and whatnot, and then they'll get my blogs and upcoming things sent directly to their inbox. And then my fan page on Facebook, I don't use my personal page at all. My fan page is Coach Scott Abel on Facebook. You have to put the coach in front of the Scott Abel, and that's ABEL, not LE. And I'm also on Amazon. A few of my books are on Amazon. We'll be transitioning more and more books onto Amazon. As you know, like this weekend, we put my book Beyond Metabolism on Amazon, and every product that we've put on Amazon, I'm happy to say, has reached #1 in all its categories. Wow. In the first day of the launch, and that's every single product that we've moved over there. So it's obviously reaching people where they live and what they want to hear. That book went right to #1 in diet, health, and fitness, and it also made me the #1 author in diet and health and fitness the day we launched. So, I think that's a testament to the kind of things people are wanting to hear, which isn't usual industry drivel, like say what everyone else is saying so you don't ruffle feathers. That's never been my nature. I've always been something like, okay, what aren't people saying that needs to be said? What aren't people knowing that needs to be known? What aren't people understanding that needs to be understood? And that's kind of where I come from with all my books and whatnot. So looking forward to getting even more products on Amazon and, hitting people on a more worldwide level.
Great. Well, look, it's been great having you on the show, and hopefully can get on here again because, I really love chatting with you.
Sure, yeah, look forward to it. Maybe next time we can, there's all kinds of different directions we can go into, and the training aspect or the diet aspect without the, all the emotional elements and body image stuff we talked about today. There's all kinds of ways we can go. So anytime you want me on, Chris, just let me know.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.